Right now, floating 300 miles above your head in the freezing vacuum of space, a giant $150 billion football field made of titanium and solar panels is hurtling through orbit at 17,500 miles per hour. It has been up there for nearly 30 years, housing world-class scientists, high-tech orbital plumbing nightmares, and brave humans who eat floating spinach out of vacuum-sealed aluminum pouches. It is the International Space Station, arguably the most expensive, complex, and remarkable cooperative achievement in human history. But in just a few short years, engineers from around the globe are going to do something that sounds completely unhinged. They are going to take this giant, radioactive shielded orbital palace, point its thrusters straight down toward the Pacific Ocean, and deliberately plunge it into the atmosphere to burn, melt, and crash into the water forever. Why on earth would humanity intentionally destroy the most expensive piece of real estate ever constructed? Is it simply a victim of old age, or is there something far more concerning happening in lower Earth orbit? The most terrifying reality about the retirement of the International Space Station is not just that its metal is aging or its pipes are leaking. It is that a 400-ton death trap is circling directly over populated global cities, and if we do not intentionally shoot it down with surgical precision, it will eventually fall out of the sky on its own, crushing whatever lies beneath it. To understand how we ended up with a $150 billion ticking time bomb over our heads, you first have to grasp what it actually took to build this floating titan in the first place. Back in the late 1990s, Cold War rivals who had spent decades staring at each other through missile sights decided to sit down, shake hands, and build a home together among the stars. The United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada all pooled their brainpower and wallets. It was a staggering feat of engineering insanity. Imagine trying to assemble a high-tech skyscraper where every single brick has to be delivered on top of a controlled explosion, and the construction workers are wearing bulky pressurized suits while dangling over a pitch-black abyss at 5 miles per second. Over dozens of high-stakes rocket launches and space shuttle missions, astronauts slowly snapped modules together like a multi-billion-dollar Lego set. When it was finally completed, the ISS was a technological miracle. It stretched 357 feet across, weighed nearly 1 million pounds, and provided as much livable interior space as a 6-bedroom house, complete with 2 bathrooms, a gym, and a panoramic glass dome overlooking Earth. For nearly 3 decades, it has been continuously inhabited, producing revolutionary scientific breakthroughs in cancer treatments and kidney disease research. It stood as a shining beacon of human peace and technological supremacy. So, how much did this ultimate symbol of peace cost the global taxpayer? Grab your seatbelt. The cumulative price tag for designing, building, launching, and operating the station crossed $150 billion long ago. That single mind-boggling number makes the ISS the single most expensive physical object ever created in human history. To put that into perspective, with that kind of money, you could buy several major professional sports leagues, build a massive fleet of nuclear aircraft carriers, or purchase a medium-sized island nation and still have enough leftover cash to buy everyone on Earth a gourmet coffee. Keeping this giant metal house alive day to day is an ongoing financial nightmare. NASA alone burns through roughly $3 to $4 billion every single year just to keep the oxygen flowing, scrub the toxic carbon dioxide out of the air, and ship fresh clothing and food to the crew. That breaks down to roughly $10 million every single day in basic operational expenses. When a routine plumbing failure in the orbital toilet requires a 6-hour emergency spacewalk and a $40 million emergency supply launch, the term basic maintenance takes on a terrifying financial reality. Which brings us to the bizarre business model behind the space station. How does a $150 billion floating vacuum chamber actually justify its existence? Officially, the ISS was never designed to be a cash-generating enterprise. It was conceived as a non-profit international laboratory and a diplomatic public relations asset. Global governments willingly threw billions into the cosmic money pit, and in return, humanity received cutting-edge scientific data, industrial patents, and geopolitical goodwill. However, over the past decade, corporate capitalism began leaking into orbit. Global companies realized that microgravity offers a unique environment that is completely impossible to replicate on Earth. In zero gravity, pharmaceutical firms can growth unique structures, and biotech pioneers can even 3D print living human heart tissue and complex organs without gravity, causing the soft cellular structures to collapse before they solidify. Private companies began paying tens of millions of dollars to fly their proprietary experiments into orbit. High-end commercial agencies began selling tickets to ultra-wealthy civilians, charging upwards of $50 million for a short 2-week vacation with a zero-gravity view of the planet. Commercial satellite operators paid handsomely to use the station's robotic arms as a deployment platform for hardware. Yet despite these promising private income streams, the commercial revenue generated on board remains a tiny drop in a very large, extremely expensive bucket. The International Space Station remains heavily dependent on massive government subsidies. It is an undeniable engineering masterpiece, but financially speaking, it is a giant orbital money-burning machine that devours public funds faster than a rocket engine consumes liquid fuel. And unfortunately, that financial drain is now compounded by a much scarier problem: the physical degradation of the station itself. Space is not a friendly neighborhood for aging machinery. Outside the thin aluminum skin of the International Space Station, conditions are nightmarishly hostile. Every 90 minutes, as the station orbits Earth at breakneck speeds, it passes from blinding direct sunlight into the pitch-black shadow of the planet. This causes internal structural temperatures to swing violently from 250 degrees Fahrenheit above zero down to minus 250 degrees below zero. That constant, relentless thermal expansion and contraction bakes the station's structural frame 16 times a day, every single day, for nearly 30 years. At the same time, the station is continuously pelted by a non-stop rain of high-energy cosmic radiation, solar radiation, and microscopic space debris. Specks of dust and paint flecks traveling at 20,000 miles per hour strike the solar arrays and radiator panels, leaving tiny craters and microscopic fractures. Over 2 decades of this non-stop cosmic pounding, structural metal fatigue sets in. Aluminum hulls lose their flexibility, seals begin to dry out, valves become sticky, and giant solar panels degrade, losing their ability to generate electricity efficiently. In recent years, these structural warnings stopped being theoretical and became terrifyingly real. Deep inside the Russian Zvezda service module, small, stubborn air leaks began popping up. Astronauts and cosmonauts found themselves playing a high-stakes game of orbital hide-and-seek using specialized acoustic sensors, ultrasonic leak detectors, and even floating tea leaves to track down hairline cracks hidden behind instrument panels. When they found them, they patched them with specialized epoxies and tape, but new microscopic fissures kept appearing elsewhere. To make matters worse, the station has suffered several terrifying mechanical hiccups. Maneuvering thrusters on incoming supply ships have occasionally misfired after docking, causing the entire 1,000-pound station to accidentally spin out of orientation and flex its massive central truss frame. Ground control engineers analyze every single shutter, strain gauge reading, and vibration recorded by thousands of onboard sensors. Their conclusion is unanimous and unsettling. The structural metal is exhausted. You can patch a leaky pipe or replace a fried circuit board, but you cannot replace the cracked main structural frame of an orbiting house without taking the whole thing apart. Not only were the structural modules cracking under cosmic pressure, but the political foundation holding them together was fracturing even faster down on Earth. The ISS was built on a very specific, deeply interdependent marriage between 2 primary space powers, the United States and Russia. The station is essentially split into 2 halves that cannot survive without each other. The American segment provides the massive solar arrays that generate the electricity required to power life support systems and scientific payloads across the entire station. However, the Russian segment controls the primary propulsion systems and thrusters needed to maintain orbital altitude. Because lower Earth orbit still contains tiny traces of atmospheric gas, the massive space station constantly experiences subtle atmospheric drag. Without intervention, atmospheric friction slowly pulls the station downward, causing its orbit to decay by several miles every month. To prevent it from tumbling down out of control, Russian Progress cargo ships periodically fire their engines to push the station back up into a safe, high orbit. It was a perfect symbiotic relationship. America provided the juice, and Russia provided the muscle. Then came the sharp escalation of geopolitical tensions on Earth. As relations between Washington and Moscow fractured over military conflicts, sanctions, and diplomatic fallouts, space exploration was dragged straight into the political mud. Russian space officials began making dramatic public statements, threatening to pull out of the ISS program entirely, decouple their modules, or cease providing the orbital reboosts that keep the station from crashing into Earth. Though both sides eventually agreed to extend operations until the end of the decade, the trust was permanently shattered. The delicate diplomatic bridge that held the station together for 3 decades had completely collapsed. Faced with an aging, crack-riddled station and an unpredictable political partner, NASA made a historic calculation. Continuing to patch up a decaying floating laboratory for billions of dollars a year was no longer sustainable or smart. The money needed to be redirected toward humanity's next great giant leap, returning humans to the moon through the Artemis program and eventually pushing forward to Mars. But NASA could not simply walk away and leave lower Earth orbit empty. Abandoning orbit entirely would mean ceding total control of near-Earth space to rival nations, most notably China, which had already successfully built and operationalized its own modern, modular Tiangong space station. If governments could no longer afford to run the neighborhood, they needed to turn lower Earth orbit over to private enterprise. A brand new economic era was born, the era of commercial space stations. Instead of governments owning and running the orbital real estate, private corporations would build, launch, and manage their own mini-space stations, renting out room to governments, research labs, and private tourists alike. Companies like Axiom Space, Blue Origin, and Voyager Space quickly unveiled ambitious blueprints for sleek commercial orbital outposts. Axiom plans to attach commercial modules directly to the ISS first, utilizing its power grid before detaching into an independent private station when the ISS is destroyed. Blue Origin proposed Orbital Reef, envisioned as a mixed-use business park in space complete with luxury accommodations and automated manufacturing bays. But before any of these futuristic commercial real estate projects can fully take over the sky, space agencies face one final terrifying technical hurdle. How do you safely kill a million-pound Titan orbiting above millions of populated human cities? You cannot simply push a button and let a million-pound spacecraft drift down on its own. Left to natural orbital decay, the International Space Station would eventually fall out of the sky in an uncontrolled, unpredictable fiery wreck. Because the station is constructed out of massive, dense titanium beams, thick steel pressure hulls, and heavy heat-resistant alloys, huge chunks of it would easily survive the intense heat of atmospheric re-entry. Giant pieces of metal weighing several tons would rain down across the globe at hypersonic speeds. If an uncontrolled re-entry happened over a densely populated region like London, Tokyo, New York, or Mumbai, the casualties and infrastructural destruction would be catastrophic. To prevent a global disaster, engineers must execute a precisely choreographed, highly dangerous suicide dive. The plan is known as controlled deorbiting. NASA recently awarded a contract worth up to $840 million to SpaceX to build a custom, superpowered vehicle specifically designed for this single destructive task, the US Deorbit Vehicle. This spacecraft will be a massive, specialized variant of SpaceX's Dragon capsule, packed with extra propellant tanks, powerful engines, and specialized navigation systems. Here is how the execution will go down. First, controllers on Earth will allow the ISS's orbit to naturally decay over several months, letting atmospheric drag gently pull the giant structure down from its usual altitude of 400 kilometers down to about 220 kilometers. During this phase, the final human crew will pack up critical historical artifacts, science samples, and personal gear. The moment of departure will be deeply emotional. Astronauts will flip off the main lights, hatch by hatch, leaving behind the dark, echoing hallways they called home for decades. As the final crew boards their return capsule, detaches, and looks back, the ISS will transition from humanity's crowning achievement into a silent, uncrewed ghost ship drifting through the upper atmosphere. When the station drops to the critical threshold, SpaceX's specialized Deorbit vehicle will dock with the forward port of the station. It will fire its powerful thrusters in a massive, continuous retrograde burn, acting like a giant space brake. This burn will drastically slow the station down, breaking its orbital momentum and forcing it into a steep, inescapable dive down toward a very specific target zone on Earth, Point Nemo. Point Nemo, located deep in the South Pacific Ocean between New Zealand and the southern tip of South America, is officially known as the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. It is the furthest place on planet Earth from any dry land, surrounded by thousands of miles of empty, icy ocean. It is so isolated that the closest human beings to Point Nemo are often the astronauts living aboard the ISS as they pass 400 kilometers directly overhead. Point Nemo is where space agencies have buried over 250 satellites and space stations over the decades, making it the official graveyard of the space age. As the station slams into the dense lower atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean at over 17,000 miles per hour, extreme atmospheric friction will generate temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A blinding plasma trail miles long will streak across the night sky. The massive solar panels and radiator arrays will snap off and vaporize in seconds. The pressurized modules will rupture, crumple, and burst open as internal atmospheric pressure violently expands against the scorching plasma wall. Up to 70% of the station's total mass will vaporize into harmless metallic dust in the upper atmosphere. But the heaviest structural joints, titanium docking rings, and dense engine casings will survive the fiery inferno. They will crash into the remote waters of Point Nemo at hundreds of miles per hour, sinking thousands of feet down to the dark, silent ocean floor, where they will rest forever alongside the historic remains of Russia's Mir space station and NASA's Skylab. The destruction of the International Space Station will mark the end of an extraordinary, unprecedented era of human unity in space. For over 30 years, nations set aside deep ideological conflicts, military rivalries, and economic wars to maintain a peaceful, shared home in the heavens. It was a place where American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts shared meals, fixed plumbing, and looked out the window together at a fragile blue marble with no visible national borders. As the station sinks to the bottom of the ocean, it leaves behind a radically changed world. The near-Earth sky is no longer a quiet, government-dominated scientific sanctuary. It is rapidly transforming into a bustling, commercialized industrial zone dominated by private mega-constellations, orbital factories, luxury space hotels, and corporate outposts. At the same time, national space agencies are shifting their gaze far beyond lower Earth orbit, building the Lunar Gateway Station and pushing human boots back onto the Moon and eventually toward the red dust of Mars. The story of the ISS's retirement is not a tragedy about waste or failure. It is the natural, inevitable story of technological evolution. Just as wooden sailing ships gave way to steel steamships and early aviation outposts paved the way for international commercial airports, the destruction of the ISS is simply the messy, expensive price of progress. The most expensive structure in human history was never meant to last forever. Its ultimate legacy is not the titanium frame rusting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, but the undeniable proof that humanity can accomplish impossible miracles when we choose to build together instead of tear each other down.